Hey, welcome to Socialism for All. This file is being recorded for the August 2022 edition of Socialism for All. It's an audiobook and discussion of Two Camps by Stalin from 1919. If you like this video, please click like and subscribe, and consider supporting on Patreon at patreon.com/socialismforall. There's a link to Patreon in the video description. So the source for this piece is Joseph Stalin Works, Volume 4, November 1917 to 1920, published by Foreign Languages Publishing House, Moscow, 1953. HTML transcription and markup by Salil Sen for MIA, Marxists Internet Archive, 2009. And it's in the public domain at the Marxists Internet Archive, marxists.org. Thanks as usual to MIA for hosting this and thousands of other free Marxist texts. So, 1919, what was going on in the world? Well, World War I, the first great inter-imperialist war, was recently concluded after having brought devastation across the most technologically advanced countries in the world, and the socialist movement took some steps closer to ending capitalism. Lenin and the Bolsheviks provided leadership for the Russian revolutionary movement to overthrow the bourgeois provisional government. Basically, under the chaos of World War I, they were able successfully to turn the imperialist war into a war against the imperialists, socialist revolution. In the wake of World War I, a couple of other countries would also have a revolutionary moment, although most of these were incomplete or fleeting. About 25 years later, though, after World War II, a lot more would change. Going back to the post-World War I moment, though, the Russian communists were fighting to hang on to their country against the forces of reaction that were trying to take it back for capitalism, and Stalin had the following to say about the situation. Before we get into the audiobook, though, I want to just mention there is a concept out there now called campism. There is a fair amount written about it, there are videos about it, etc. It is a very sloppy kind of anti-imperialist analysis or attempt at anti-imperialist analysis. We'll come back to that after reading the piece by Stalin because it is relevant. Alright. The world has definitely and irrevocably split into two camps, the camp of imperialism and the camp of socialism. Over there, in their camp, are America and Britain, France and Japan, with their capital, armaments, tried agents, and experienced administrators. Here, in our camp, are Soviet Russia and the young Soviet republics, and the growing proletarian revolution in the countries of Europe, without capital, without tried agents or experienced administrators, but on the other hand, with experienced agitators, capable of firing the hearts of the working people with the spirit of emancipation. The struggle between these two camps constitutes the hub of present-day affairs, determines the whole substance of the present home and foreign policies of the leaders of the old and the new worlds. Estland and Lithuania, the Ukraine and the Crimea, Turkestan and Siberia, Poland and the Caucasus, and finally Russia itself are not aims in themselves. They are only an arena of struggle, of a mortal struggle between two forces, imperialism, which is striving to strengthen the yoke of slavery, and socialism, which is fighting for emancipation from slavery. The strength of imperialism lies in the ignorance of the masses, who create wealth for their masters and forge chains of oppression for themselves. But the ignorance of the masses is a transient thing, and inevitably tends to be dispelled in the course of time, as the dissatisfaction of the masses grows and the revolutionary movement spreads. The imperialists have capital, but who does not know that capital is powerless in the face of the inevitable? For this reason, the rule of imperialism is impermanent and insecure. The weakness of imperialism lies in its powerlessness to end the war without catastrophe, without increasing mass unemployment, without further robbery of its own workers and peasants, without further seizures of foreign territory. It is a question not of ending the war, nor even of victory over Germany, but of who is to be made to pay the billions spent on the war. Russia emerged from the imperialist war rejuvenated because she ended the war at the cost of the imperialists, home and foreign, and laid the expense of the war on those who were directly responsible for it by expropriating them. The imperialists cannot do this. They cannot expropriate themselves, otherwise they would not be imperialists. To end the war in imperialist fashion, they are compelled to doom the workers to starvation, wholesale unemployment due to the closing down of, quote, unprofitable plants, additional indirect taxation, a terrific rise in prices of food. They are, quote, compelled to plunder Germany, Austria-Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria, the Ukraine, the Caucasus, Turkestan, Siberia. Need it be said that all this broadens the base of revolution, shakes the foundations of imperialism, and hastens the inevitable catastrophe. 3 months ago, imperialism, drunk with victory, was rattling the saber and threatened to overrun Russia with its armed hordes. How could, quote, poverty-stricken and, quote, savage Soviet Russia hold out against the, quote, disciplined army of the British and French, who had smashed even the Germans for all their vaunted technical equipment? So they thought. But they overlooked a trifle. They failed to realize that peace, even an indecent peace, would inevitably undermine the discipline of their army and rouse its opposition to another war, while unemployment and high living costs would inevitably strengthen the revolutionary movement of the workers against their imperialists. And what did we find? The disciplined army proved unfit for purposes of intervention. It sickened with an inevitable disease, demoralization. The boasted civil peace and law and order turned into their opposite, into civil war. The hastily concocted bourgeois, quote, governments in the border regions of Russia proved to be soap bubbles, unsuitable as a camouflage for intervention, which had been undertaken, of course, in the name of humanitarianism and civilization. As to Soviet Russia, not only did their hope for a walkover fail, they even deemed it necessary to retreat a little and invite her to a conference on the Prince's Islands. Footnote there, the Council of the Entente, with the professed aim of establishing peace in Russia, decided to invite the Soviet government and the Kolchak, Denikin, and other counter-revolutionary governments to send representatives to a conference to be held in February 1919 on the Prince's Islands in the Sea of Marmora. The conference did not take place. Back to the text. For the successes of the Red Army, the appearance of new national Soviet republics which were infecting neighboring countries with the spirit of revolution, the spread of revolution in the West, and the appearance of workers and soldiers Soviets in the Entente countries were arguments that were more than persuasive. What's more, things have reached a point where even Clemenceau, the implacable, who only yesterday refused to issue passports to the Bern Conference, and who is preparing to devour, quote, anarchistic Russia, is today, having been rather mauled by the revolution, not averse to availing himself of the services that honest, quote, Marxist broker, the old Kautsky, and wants to send him to Russia to negotiate, that is to say, investigate. Truly, where are they now, the haughty words, the lordly strength, the royal mien? All these changes took place in the space of some 3 months. We have every ground for affirming that the trend will continue in the same direction, for it has to be admitted that in the present moment of storm and stress, Russia is the only country in which social and economic life is proceeding, quote, normally, without strikes or anti-government demonstrations, that the Soviet government is the most stable of all the existing governments in Europe, and that the strength and prestige of Soviet Russia, both at home and abroad, are growing day by day in direct proportion to the decline of the strength and prestige of the imperialist governments. The world has split into 2 irreconcilable camps, the camp of imperialism and the camp of socialism. Imperialism in its death throes is clutching at the last straw, the League of Nations, trying to save itself by uniting the robbers of all countries into a single alliance. Comment, the League of Nations was the predecessor of the United Nations. But its efforts are in vain, because time and circumstances are working against it and in favor of socialism. The tide of socialist revolution is irresistibly rising and investing the strongholds of imperialism. Its thunder is re-echoing through the countries of the oppressed East. The soil is beginning to burn under the feet of imperialism. Imperialism is doomed to inevitable destruction. Izvestia, number 41, February 22, 1919. So that's the end of the audiobook. And as you can hear, there is obviously clear reference to the kind of concept that we see in campism today. That you have the camp of imperialism, all of the, United States basically, and its allies, countries that regularly work with the United States, lumped into one group, and then basically any country that opposes the United States, really no matter what the character of that other country is now in the, quote, anti-imperialist camp. Except when Stalin was writing this, and, I have to say a lot of people referring to, like, campism today or exhibiting kind of a campist analysis, I'm in no way trying to lay this on Stalin. You just see it expressed here very early on by Stalin. And I'm not even saying that people who try to make a campist argument today necessarily refer specifically to this piece. And I don't think that what Stalin was writing here was incorrect in 1919 either. This was, a very brief piece that was intended to be persuasive and encouraging. It's not like an entire treatise on some new international relations theory. Just basically saying, hey, our revolution is winning. There are now entire countries that are under communist leadership. This is a first. Contrast what we're doing with what they're doing over in the imperialist camp, etc. So it's not deep analysis, and I don't think it was intended to be. It was, again, supposed to be persuasive and encouraging at a time when the revolution needed to really keep fighting. Things were difficult, but if they dug in, they really did have a world to win, and Stalin was trying to point to that world. So, entirely valid. Not so much, though, to try to still use this analysis today. Why? Well, what does Stalin open with? The world has definitely and irrevocably split into two camps, the camp of imperialism and the camp of socialism. So you see people, for example, trying to paint Russia, capitalist counter-revolutionary Russia, as anti-imperialist. Well, at least by this Stalin's analysis, that wouldn't work at all, because they're not in the camp of socialism. They are also in the camp of imperialism, albeit a smaller, weaker imperialism. But they're certainly not socialist in any way. And you can't just call things that are blatantly capitalist, even in the case of Russia, anti-Soviet. I mean, this is the government that basically arose out of the ashes of the destruction of the world's foremost socialist federation. They are definitely not the biggest imperialist power in the world, but they are capitalist and very much anti-socialist. Yes, there is a communist party, by the way, not the same communist party, but a new one that was formed after the destruction of the USSR. And yeah, they do have some seats in the Russian government, and a little bit more percentage of seats than you would find in, say, Italy or Greece or wherever that has some communists in the government. But not very many. We're talking like 10% at most, okay? Communists are not calling the shots in Russia. Not by a long shot. Then you have other countries which are allied with Russia, which, again, are not Marxist-Leninists, certainly in any sense. They may be trying to have a path that is somewhat autonomous in relation to the United States. They're trying to resist massive exploitation or having a U.S. puppet government installed. But that doesn't qualify them as socialist, nothing of the kind. In fact, I think really what's happening is there's just another capitalist bloc of, you could say, the underdogs coming together, rejecting United States exploitation. However, these are all capitalist powers led by their bourgeoisie and exploiting their proletariat. Sometimes even, as in the case of Russia, invading neighboring countries, partly out of military and strategic concerns, but partly also out of sheer resource acquisition needs. So, is the world today still definitely split into two camps, the camp of imperialism and the camp of socialism? No, it isn't. So people who try to pull sort of the campist lazy analysis, they're on shakier footing than ever doing so. Unfortunately, the reality is the socialist movement fell into revisionism a long time ago, and large portions of it simply need to be reconstructed almost from the ground up. We can do that work, but one thing that does not get us any closer to reaching that goal is pretending that things that aren't socialist are. And unfortunately, the tortured logic of today's campists just runs the proletariat in a circle, ends up with class collaborationism, basically uses imperialism as a justification for every kind of non-revolutionary measure that you can think of. We got to get back to the basics. Yes, imperialism is a threat. Also, class struggle is foundational, fundamental, and it's being forgotten, swept away, left behind in this maelstrom of, imperialism is the primary contradiction, therefore anything goes. No, time to put the foot down. Campism was, even back in the day when the world was much more divided into the imperialist world and the socialist world. I mean, even in those days, there was a large non-aligned movement, which of course did trend closer to socialism, but not exclusively. It was always a kind of shorthand that glossed over a lot of details and was intended for inspirational speeches just like this one. But the analysis absolutely has to go deeper, and you see some of the just cocoons people are spinning themselves into, trying to interpret the world today using the, capitalist multipolarity and which side are you going to be on, and somebody said something bad to the United States, therefore they're automatically our friend, and saying anything against that country that said something bad to the United States is reactionary. It's just, you can lose your mind trying to follow it. It's absolutely twisted reasoning. So, time to cut the cord, clean break, no to campism. Back in the day when they were setting up the Comintern, and there really was a tidal wave of highly organized communist revolution, people who really knew what they were doing, were really seizing power, etc., sweeping across the world, that was one thing. We got a different situation today. We got to rebuild a lot of the infrastructure that they had already built decades prior, and we got to do it fast. Stop this sort of hero worship of every time a country says something mean about the United States, they're automatically like the most based thing that ever existed. If we can't do better analysis than that, then we will end up exactly nowhere. All right, what do you think? Leave a question or comment below. We will continue the discussion in the comment section as always. Otherwise, thanks for listening. And thanks to the current patrons whose names are on the screen. If you'd like to get your name on the screen, head to patreon.com/socialismforall. We don't run ads or sponsorships on this channel, so that support is highly welcome. It's allowed me to spend a lot more time working on this channel than I would have been able to do otherwise. Every donation is encouraging. They're also materially helpful, so thank you all for those. Then, after the content is produced and uploaded, engagement counts, so like, share, subscribe, and comment, even if it's thanks or good video. That all encourages YouTube to share this content with more and more people, and it keeps the audience expanding, which, capitalism is having major crises right now. We do have a lot to rebuild in terms of the international socialist communist movement, and putting these resources in the hands of more people is one path to accomplishing that. Thanks again, and we will catch you in the next video.